throw your Barbara Walters in there. I'm Hugh Downs. Like, you
I'm
don't.
Hugh Downs.
Welcome to the Greens and Blues Fourteener podcast. This episode, Zach takes a tour de Roach. I realize that the views from Eric are much better than the views of Eric. And Zach and I review the classic Roach guidebook, Colorado Fourteeners from Hikes to Climbs. Zach, good morning. Summer is in full swing. I'm sure that in Norman, it's like unbearably hot and humid. How are you doing today?
You are not wrong, my friend.
That sounds miserable.
It's supposed to be 98 degrees today, and
Good
I
gravy.
I was telling you, so we hiked together a few days ago. I was telling you that it's been quite humid, and one of the news channels here, I was watching the news while I was working out, and they were talking about the different dew point indices,
Oh, that's right.
and
Yeah,
and
yeah.
they were like, one was like it gave levels and then different shades of green. Like the darkest green was the highest dew point,
Highest dew point. Yeah.
which means it's really muggy, right?
Yep.
And so it gave these levels, like one was muggy, one was uncomfortable, and then the last one was ridiculous. And it kind of felt Spaceballs, right? Like ludicrous.
Yeah,
Um,
ludicrous speed.
yeah, and we're not in the ridiculous category today, but I think we're in the very uncomfortable phase today. So, yeah, it's hot,
Um,
but I've been getting in some hiking. I've got a story to tell you about that. But before we jump into my fun story, Eric, how are you? What's going on?
Doing good. Got to see you a few days ago. We got to hike a 13er with another one that was kind of on the docket, but was not meant to be for a couple different reasons. But yeah, today here it's 90, but a very dry 90. I don't think that Colorado knows what the word muggy
Mm,
means. If I didn't grow up in Michigan, I would have no idea. But here it's 90 is actually like you can actually sit outside if you're in the shade.
mhm.
Sorry if I'm making you jealous. I'm probably being cruel right now, but
Just daggers in my heart, Eric. Daggers in my heart.
good thing we're talking today. Uh, But yeah, that's what's going on with me. So yeah, you have mentioned as we were getting ready for this episode that you had a story from a recent hike, not one that you and I had done together, but you have kept it to yourself. You haven't shared it so that my reaction would be real time. So I am very curious to hear what happened involving Dolores Peak.
Yes, so this is a fail. So I did not summit. I'm just spoiler alert, but that's actually not the conclusion of the story. My family and I took a big long family trip, Griswold family trip through like Monument Valley and the Grand
Yeah.
Canyon. We hiked the rim of the Grand Canyon, not like down in, but we just hiked along the rim. We went to Sedona, and then we went to my daughter's favorite place in the whole wide world, which is San Diego. We were
Mm,
there for 4 days. My family flew back. So my wife and daughter flew back to sunny Norman, Oklahoma. I drove back, and I thought, well, if I'm driving back, I might as well just, make a little detour through southern Colorado and hike some peaks.
yeah.
And my first thought was, well, I'm going to be far west, and it's a day's drive. I'll go somewhere near Telluride or somewhere in the kind of far west. So the peak I picked for the day was it was going to be Dolores and Middle Peak. Those were the two peaks
Mm,
I wanted to do.
yeah.
I think they're the westernmost 13ers in the state. I don't know. Maybe I'd have to see where like Hesperus and Lavender and stuff are, the La Plata peaks. But anyway, so I go there. I'm working off of Laura Clark's trip description that she did, that she wrote up. So Wild Wanderer, Laura Clark. And Laura, if you're listening to this, your trip report is good. I just want to say that at the outset. So I camp out that night, drive to the trailhead. Thank you, Laura. Very nice description of where the trailhead is. I head up the trail, and no, sorry, it's not much of a trail. It's just a bunch of old, broken, it's a combination of like game trails and roads and stuff. It's like you're within a quarter mile, you're bushwhacking, or you're walking on these segments of broken road.
Yeah.
And as I'm going up, Laura wanted me to go into a middle drainage. But I kept looking to the right and thinking, that looks a lot better. And the saddle there looks a lot easier because Laura had indicated there's like a waterfall you've got to kind of go around if you go up this middle drainage. But the drainage to my right or to the east looked way better. And I was like, I'm going to do that. That looks better. I followed my own muse and I went up and I felt good, even though I'd been at sea level for almost a week and playing on the beach. Went up. I get up to this saddle before I'm supposed to go up Dolores. And I'm kind of looking up and I'm like, that looks a lot harder than it looked like from below. And I'm
Mm.
just kind of admiring it. I'm at this lovely saddle. There's a view of the Wilson group, so I can see like El
Okay.
Diente and
Yep.
Gladstone and Wilson. And I'm like, man, they look spectacular and really great views. I'm just kind of standing there admiring, and I look down, and I swear, Eric, no further than 2 feet from my left foot is a baby deer just laying there.
No way.
Like, I don't know how I didn't step on
But
this thing.
yeah, it like magically appeared.
No, it had been laying there, and it's just so well camouflaged.
Whoa.
And it was so still for a minute. I was like, oh, this deer is dead. I was like,
Oh no.
oh no, this is terrible. And then I kind of looked at it and it let me get eerily close. And I could see its little nostrils flaring, right? And
Okay.
I'm like,
Yep.
okay, it's alive. But
Hmm.
I should also say, it's very cold and very windy on this saddle that I'm on. And I'm like, what the heck? And it's like at 12,200, 12,300 feet.
Hmm.
And there's not a lot of habitat around or anything. And I was looking around, I was like, I don't see Mama anywhere. And I'm sure Mama may have been hidden somewhere. I don't know. And so in my head, I start kind of panicking. I'm like, this deer needs to get off of here. Like, it needs to go down and get out of this weather here. It looks sickly. It's just laying there kind of hunkered down. I take my hiking pole and I turn it around so it's not the pointy end, but it's the
Yep.
soft end. And
Yep.
I'm like, "Hey, buddy, you gotta go." And I kind of give them a little gentle poke. It won't move. And I'm like,
Whoa.
"Oh my gosh, this poor creature is just gonna die up here." I had some almonds, laid out some little almonds in front of it. I was like, "Here, buddy, have some almonds." And it wouldn't move. And I kind of attended to it for 10 minutes and just kind of like, you need to go. And it didn't go. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go try and hike this mountain and then I'll come down or not and see how it is. So I start up the east ridge of Dolores. That is a just giant pile of suck that it's basically like dinner plates stacked on top of each other at a
Oh no.
30 or 35-degree angle. It's just garbage.
That's awful.
I was like, I got about 200 or 300 feet up this thing. I think I checked my altimeter. I got to 12.7 and I was like, and it started to get a little steeper. And I was like, this is just not worth it. I'm not enjoying this. And I was really worried about this poor little deer. And so I was like, I'm pulling the ripcord on today. Like, I'm done. So had I gone Laura Clark's way, I would have summited.
Hmm.
Because the way she did it, way better and way easier. The way I did it, I screwed up. So for those of you listening, don't try the East Ridge of Dolores Peak. Don't do what I
And if
did.
Laura Clark says do something, it's very likely a good way to go.
Generally, she's got good advice.
She's on top of it. So did you
Anyway,
go back down and encounter or at least look for this deer again?
oh yeah, and the deer was right where I left it.
Oh my
And I
gosh.
was just really freaked out. So I mean, there's a ton of rocks there. So I built a little shelter around it to keep it out of the wind. And I just left and I was like, that deer is going to die. I felt terrible. It was really sad the whole day. Maybe the coda or the postscript to this is, so I don't really know what was going on with that deer, but I talked to my dad and my
Mm,
dad's like, deer kind of do that. They just kind of lay down and wait for their mom. And unless their mama comes along, they don't really move. And I was like, really,
mm,
Dad? Like, I know staying in place is a good one, but like if I was a predator, that deer would have been in trouble. And then I told a friend of mine here in Oklahoma about it. And he's like, I would have thought that was crazy until a day ago, but I was just talking to a friend of mine he has property and he has to drive a brush hog over it, which is like a thing that cuts down brush and stuff.
Okay. Yeah.
And he's like, he was telling me he almost runs over a deer a week on that thing, a baby deer, because they just lay down and they won't, like, even if you drive up onto it, you can even drive halfway over them and that, like, accidentally, of course, and they
Yeah.
won't even move.
No
And I was
way.
like, oh, so maybe this is like a behavior and maybe that deer wasn't in distress. And then, of course, I stressed it out. So, anyway, I don't know what was going on. All my life, I'm 47 and a half. I've never seen anything like that my whole life.
Yeah.
And for a deer to let me get that close to it, not even move an inch, I thought it was distressing. So, if any of our listeners have encountered this before, email us, greensandbluespodcast@gmail.com. Tell me what's going on here. I'm not a wildlife biologist, so maybe that's really a thing, but boy, it really kind of cast a damper over the day. It had me kind of worried about this poor little deer. So that's my
Wow.
story, Eric. Reactions?
That is one heck of a story. Yeah, I've never encountered anything close to that. I mean, good on you for wanting to. I mean, you mentioned you may have stressed it out. Who knows? If it's really not even going to move, then who knows what's going through its mind. But good on you for at least trying to give it a little sustenance and a little bit of shelter from show. I mean, you're above tree line, I'm assuming.
Oh,
There's
way
maybe
above.
brush around, but no trees. So
Not
like to
even
build
brush. It was pretty rocky up there. That was the thing.
yeah.
That's what worried me. I was like, this is a weird place to hide.
Like it's one thing if it's below tree line and you've got a
Mm-hmm.
little bit of shelter or at least near maybe a brook or something to get some water or something, but if it's just way up there by itself, that is weird and probably yeah, the best thing you can hope for is that mom's coming back and encourage kid to, hey, let's get going to where there's some shelter and some food and water or something. But yeah, that's a deal right there.
It was unique. I hope I never encounter it again. It was weird. It was kind of haunting.
Yeah, I
Uh,
would imagine.
it strikes me in hindsight that it's either a little baby waiting for mama or it was a deer just desperately resigned to its own fate,
Mm-hmm.
whatever that was.
Or maybe
And
abandoned. Like
or
hopefully
maybe
that's not the
yeah,
case.
I had that run through my head like maybe this creature. It didn't look hurt. I like
Okay.
I was really close to it and I was like I didn't touch it physically with my hands, but
Yes. Yes.
I
Yeah.
was close enough to, and it didn't look injured, but maybe it was abandoned. I don't know. Certainly strange.
Yeah. Wow. Well, there's no good segue from that into what we're actually going to talk about today. What are we going to talk about today, Zach? I'm just going to go right into it.
That was my fun little story to start the episode. We're actually going to do something different here today. We've been talking about this for a while, you and I. Both of us really enjoy reading old guidebooks, or not old, I guess some of them are new, but we are going to do a book review. And there's a few book reviews that we have kind of lined up, would like to do in the coming weeks and months and years. And of course, the book review we wanted to start with is the one that has brought us all to the table here, which is Gerry Roach's classic Colorado's Fourteeners from Hikes to Climbs. This is a book that has gone through multiple editions. I have the second edition, and the second edition here, I'm looking at the copyright page, published in 1996. And I believe the
Wow.
first edition was 1992.
Wow. And I have the
Um,
third edition, which is 2011. So yeah, that's a quite a distance from second to third.
yeah, and Jerry it was always kind of tinkering with these books in between their different iterations. So I know that they are, when they say, when it's an edition, it's also a revision that
Oh yeah.
we're talking about here. And there's actually, we're going to talk in a minute about some material that's in the third edition that's not in my old second edition. For a lot of people, perhaps of your and my vintage, this is the
That's
book
a
we,
nice way of saying it.
yeah, we're aging like wine. Uh, this is the book we kind of cut our teeth on. I remember hiking my first Fourteeners as a quasi adult in college. And this is the book that my buddy Jordan Elliott and I took with us when we hiked Elbert and La Plata. When there was no Fourteeners.com, there was no climb13ers.com.
Mhm.
There was no lists of John. There weren't
Nope.
trip reports. This and there are some other guidebooks that we'll talk about in a minute was really it. Or
That's what we had.
you ordered maps and
Hmm.
old USGS topos, and you just looked at them and you said, well, that looks like it might go from here. And then you went up and see if, checked it out. And the
Yep.
intervals on those were 30 feet. So if there was a 24-foot cliff, you wouldn't see it.
You couldn't tell. Yeah.
Couldn't tell on a map. Yeah, we're going to talk about Gerry Roach's Colorado's Fourteeners from Hikes to Climbs. And I think this is a fun way to talk about the art of guidebooking.
Mm.
And we picked a particularly salient and good one. We've both kind of been rereading it over the past few days and enjoying it. So, with that, I think the part that we both wanted to open with, Eric, is what's the structure of this? I know people are going to be like, well, the structure is it's a book. No, it's not just a book. There's a lot of stuff in this. So, what's the general kind of layout and structure of Roach's book here, Eric?
Yeah, this is not just a book for sure. The biggest meat of this book is the route descriptions and the approaches and everything to do with each individual Fourteener and Fourteener group. But that section is preceded by kind of an introduction that I think for anyone wanting to get into Fourteeners, again, to your point, Zach, we've got Fourteeners.com, we've got Listed John, we've got lots of resources, but I love Jerry's intro to this book, which includes how to be safe on the mountain. He has the principles of leave no trace. He kind of gets into, which we'll dig a little bit into further, his roach point system, which I love, especially being a mountain nerd and a numbers nerd. I think that's super helpful. From there, he digs into the main portion of the book with the trail descriptions and everything like that. And then at the end, he has an appendix, which goes through a number of different things, which again, we'll dig into. He tries to defend a couple of things like the purpose of guidebooks in the first place, which I think is really valuable. And he also defends the imperial system of measurement, which I think we're going to have a little fun talking about here in a little bit. But yeah, that's the basic structure. He's got his description of the mountains and the routes take up the bulk of the book, but he's got some really cool extras on either side of that too.
Yeah, I love the extras. Just so you know, the second edition does not have roach points.
No, are you serious?
Serious. He has a grade
Oh, I didn't
system,
know that.
which tells you kind of like how much elevation you're going to gain, but he doesn't have those discrete roach points. Somewhere between
Oh,
96 and 2011, those became a thing.
interesting.
In mine, he has a cool preface where he just talks about, how he had been hiking these things for 30 or 40 years,
Oh
37
yeah.
years to be more precise, and how he had kind of slowly accumulated these route descriptions. And I think that's important that this isn't someone that just went out and just banged out a guidebook in a couple years. This is someone who had been hiking these for a lifetime.
Hmm.
And then he has a section on goals, and he's got goals of climbing and whether or not you would do all of these. And that includes Jerry's very famous 12 commandments of mountaineering. I will just point out a couple of these, which are my favorites. Commandment number one, never get separated from your lunch.
That's yeah.
Commandment two, never get separated from your sleeping bag. True. And
Yeah,
then
yeah.
number three, the most vital, never get separated from your primal urges. But then number four, carefully consider where your primal urges are leading
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Very
Uh,
important to have the full context there.
and then my absolute favorite, number six, I wouldn't know this, but I love it. Recognize that first aid above 26,000 feet consists of getting below 26,000 feet.
That's a true classic.
So that's maybe an intro too to the fact that this is a book with some soul and some humor.
Yes.
And so I really like that part. And then you talk about the rating system where he talks about, in mine, about grade and then class, and yours talks about roach points. So class we've talked a lot about. He basically adopts the YDS, the Yosemite Decimal System, for this book, and he even gives different routes that fit into these classes. So, like the hardest route in the book, I believe, is Crestone Needles North Pillar, and that's a 5.8. So he gives all of those all the way down to Gray's Peaks North Slopes route, which is class one. So really fun. I have a question though, since I know you like to nerd out on this stuff, Eric. He's got these copious appendices at the back of the book. What do you make of those? Like, and maybe describe them and give some thoughts on what he's doing at the back of the book there.
I think a good part so I would separate it into, I guess, two sections. One is the lists that he has, which, post LiDAR, maybe those lists aren't quite as accurate as they would have been in, 1996 or 2011. But they're still helpful in terms of tracking, okay, how do different mountains compare to each other in terms of elevation, in terms of prominence, if you're trying to tackle more than one mountain at once. So I think that the appendices, as far as the mountain lists, are still helpful. I would say the other part of it, which comes before the appendices, are kind of an explanation or even a defense, like I said before. He tries to define what is a peak. I mean, that's something that you and I have
Yeah.
tackled multiple times, and probably articles have been written around, how do you define a peak or how do you define a ranked peak? But also just kind of defending, okay, why am I writing this book? Well, I'm writing it because I want people to enjoy Fourteeners. Not that I want more footsteps necessarily on the Fourteeners, but I know that's going to happen. If that's going to happen, I want people to be safe on these
Hmm.
routes. And so he kind of defends the reason for writing this guidebook in the first place and for writing it in such a detailed way.
Yeah.
Again, knowing that that's going to be appropriate and attractive to even more people than previous guidebooks have been, that probably were more sparse than this one. So, yeah, he kind of lays out all of the mountains, all of the Fourteeners at least, in different systematic fashions. And then he kind of defends, okay, everything you just read in the previous 300 plus pages of this book, here's why I did it. So that's kind of how I would summarize the appendices here. Do you have other thoughts, Z?
I think it's noteworthy that given the context for when this book was written, this was for me to have those lists at the back of the book where it lists. He goes through all the Fourteeners and sorted by elevation, sorted by peak power. If you go to
Prominence.
prominence, yeah. If you look at his 13er book, he's got all the peaks above 13,000 feet in Colorado, including
Yep.
some of the unranked ones. Prior to Fourteeners.com and Lists of John, this is where I knew where to go.
Yeah.
This is what I knew. I was trusting Gerry to tell me what was a peak and what wasn't.
Yep.
To that latter point, what's interesting to me about this book is he goes through great pains to define what a peak's power is, what makes a peak ranked or unranked. But then there are moments in this book, like the route description for El Diente, for example, which is not a ranked peak, where he says he will do this kind of dance where it's like, yeah, it's not ranked, but two things, but it's named. And
Yep.
furthermore, he even says at one moment on a couple of these, if you go up it, you'll certainly feel like it's a peak. And like that kind of feels like a peak to me is like his way of saying, yeah, maybe it's not ranked, but it's still worthy of your climb. And in fact, it may even be more worthy than some of these quote unquote ranked ones are.
Yeah.
There's this kind of just relish of just mountains in this book that is really reflected in that. I don't know if you have it too, but mine also has the appendix in defense of feet.
Oh, yeah. That's one of my
Now,
favorite parts of this whole book.
yeah, we're not talking guys about like what's on your body. We're talking about a unit of measurement here.
Well, he
I,
does reference that.
yeah, a king's foot,
That's right.
which is actually I think an old wives' tale. I don't think it's actually was measured off a king's foot. But what do you think about that section, Eric?
So we're going to dig right into that. I love it. So I've done some research over the years. I want to say that several years ago, there were 5 or 6 countries that had not fully migrated to the metric system. I looked up recently, there are now only 3 countries that have not fully migrated to the metric system. And I think one of them, Myanmar, is actually in the process of doing it, which would leave Liberia on the western coast of Africa and the United States as the only countries that still use the imperial system of measurement. Now, I'm a proponent of the metric system, but the fact that Gerry spends a couple pages defending basically a 14er guidebook that wouldn't exist if we used the metric system, I love that. And I think if you were to look at European and Asian peaks, of course, there are ones that are above like 8,000 meters.
Yeah,
So
right.
those thresholds matter. But in the US, 5,000-meter peaks, there are none in Colorado. 4,000-meter peaks, the next threshold down. is basically like 13-1. And so that list would be like several hundred peaks, which is not a manageable list of peaks to try and accomplish for most people. So the fact that we focus on Fourteeners, which narrows it down to below 60 peaks, that's a much more manageable list for people. And so I think that's, to me, and I think Gerry kind of gets to this, that's part of the appeal of keeping the imperial system of measurement is most of us are motivated by lists to some point. And if we're going to be motivated by lists, probably should be one that's somewhat manageable for us. So that kind of makes sense. That was my first thought around the in defense of feet section. What are your thoughts, Z?
Oh, similarly, there is a kind of mystique to 14,000 feet, and I think it's probably worth keeping around because it does designate a glorious cutoff for us mountain enthusiasts. He also mentions things in there like the fact that, when somebody ran a 4-minute mile, that was a big deal.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that section. He's not making an argument like it's good science. What he's making an argument of is that we have a mystique around some of these ideas that feet comes from. When a guy does a high jump and it's 8 feet, when someone runs a 4-minute mile, when you climb a peak above 14,000 feet, these are all just cultural ideas that we carry around and that carry some kind of cultural weight with them. And they're worth keeping for that reason in and of itself. I actually like the cultural defense of it better than it makes for good science or policy. It's actually better science and policy to move to the metric system. We know this, but sometimes things that don't make sense are better off. So I really appreciate that. And it just goes to show that this isn't just a guidebook.
Yeah.
This is a guidebook that defends guidebooks. It's a book with rules. It's a book with tables and appendices. I think Gerry envisioned this as like, this is the thing you're going to carry with you. And so it may be all you need. And if you're sitting there by the campfire, maybe you can read my little essay on in defense of feet.
Mm-hmm. Truly, before Fourteeners.com, even with Fourteeners.com, I think that they complement each other well. But if you're going to have something that approaches a Bible of sorts for Colorado Fourteeners, this is it. This has everything you need and more, and it's going to be an enjoyable way to learn about what you want to learn about these mountains. So,
and I guess the other thing we should say before we kind of move into the perhaps what we should say the guts of this book, the biblical aspect of it is important. And in that sense, the author is important, that we trust the author of this book. Now, there are a few times, not maybe in this book, but in the 13ers book, where Gerry has betrayed my trust, given me a route description for a 13er that I can't find my way up, calling out you, Grizzly Peak, alternate route description. I think part of what makes this book so important is that we have a lot of faith and trust in the author himself. He's done every one of these routes, and we'll talk about the copious number of routes in this thing in a sec. He's done all of these, and he's kind of slowly accumulated them. And one more thing to that, Gerry, even though the fact that he's done the 7 summits and he's done all these other peaks, even as a beginning hiker, he never betrayed my trust. At one point, Gerry reveals on his website, and I think he's told this to you and me, that at one point on a good day, he could gain 3,000 vertical feet in an hour. On a really good day, he could do 5,000 vertical feet in an hour. Even with that, for a guy like me, where between 1,200 and 1,500 vertical feet in an hour is smoking it.
That's flying, yeah.
That's flying in my world. He has never once led me astray. He's never said a route was easy when it's really hard. His route descriptions are generally super accurate.
Yeah.
And there are other guidebook authors that are like, yeah, it's a tough hike. And then you'll go and you'll be like, holy crap, I'm dying. Like, this is worse than tough. So I do think it's important to say, like, if this is going to be canon, boy, he's the right author to canonize.
He is. Can I add 2 quick points to what you just said?
Absolutely.
So, one point that I think really illustrates this well is something he said during his description of Maroon Peak.
Mm-hmm.
So he says, and I highlighted this, although the route has been well cairned in recent years, some cairns lead to bad routes. Trust your judgment, not some stranger's pile of rocks. I love that because if I see a cairn, as route finding challenged as I am, if I see a cairn, I'm going to be leaning towards, I should trust that. And he kind of brings us back down to earth and says, you know what, you shouldn't trust everything that you see on the trail, even though, to your point, Zach, I'm going to trust this book because this guy has done, like you said, the seven summits. He's done 14ers, 13ers all around the country. He's done so much and he's very trustworthy with this book as opposed to whoever random stranger built that cairn that I'm probably going to walk off a cliff because of. Um, so there's that aspect of it. And I also want to continue to push what you mentioned about safety and his push towards safety. The number of times he says the introduction is over in this book, he wants you to understand, hey, this path is it's going to take some energy. It's not going to be an easy path, and you got to be ready for it. And I love that he does that. He does it in multiple points in this book. He kind of emphasizes, hey, this route is going to tax you, and if you're not ready for it, it may not be safe for you. So, yeah, I want to just kind of re-emphasize those points. I appreciate that you mentioned that about this book.
I'm glad you mentioned that, particularly that maroon bells route description there, Eric, because I think it shows the care with which he goes about this. His attentiveness to like the common mistakes that hikers make. The introduction is over is a very classic Roachism, and we may do some more Roachisms in a minute, but I just want to know also at various times he says, take care. Like now it's time to be careful. You need to look below you. There's a catwalk here that you go across for 30 feet, and then you're going to scamper up, and he uses all kinds of cool verbs, this narrow chimney, and then you're on top or whatever. And I think that's probably a good kind of just easy transition to the guidebook part of this book. I want to say one thing. Guidebooks are not everybody writes a good guidebook. And I'm not going to throw shade at any previous guidebooks, but I think to understand perhaps why Roach's book became as big as it is and was, is to know what came before it. And there were some guidebook authors that came before Roach who wrote 13er and 14er guides. Garrett and Martin.
Yep.
Walter Borneman, Lampert. A lot of these were published by Colorado Mountain Club Press. And you'll know one when you see it. They all have a very similar font. Probably do an episode in a year or so on those books. When you look at those books, there's something that's really important to note in terms of the character of the writing. Let's say they're talking about, I don't know, Sayre's benchmark in the Sawatch. Garrett and Martin describe this. The Sayre's benchmark all in, the route description, the mountain description, the trailhead description, everything takes about a page and a half.
Oh, wow.
And it's very spare. There's almost an understanding between the reader and the author in those Garrett and Martin books and Borneman and so forth that you probably know what you need to know about how to hike or climb a mountain. You don't need help. You just need to know where to go and what drainage to start up. And then maybe the one hard thing you're going to have to avoid. But everything else we won't tell you. Those descriptions are, I guess the word I would use is economical.
Yeah.
They're super short. And there's only one description, one route per mountain. They tend to be really short and spare. Now we go to Gerry Roach's book. And Roach's book, on the other hand, is this kind of polyphony of routes, approaches for every peak. Now, there's a few where there's, like for El Diente, there's one route. For Mount Lindsay, there's one route that he gives. But for most of these, you're going to have multiple routes and multiple approaches. For some of them, it's nearly a dozen different routes that he gives.
Yeah.
Especially if it's got good climbing routes on it. And so I think that's a good place to start to kind of talk about just how Gerry talks about route descriptions.
Yeah. To go to the opposite of Garrett and Martin, I would propose that sites like Fourteerners.com give much more step by step, like here's where you want to put your feet, but not necessarily to that full level of detail. But I think Gerry kind of finds this middle ground in between those two extremes of I want you to be safe and I'm going to help you avoid the biggest mistakes you could make on this mountain.
Hmm.
But I'm not going to give you the step by step because I'm going to allow you to have some of the kind of adventure that still could be in there if you want to go beyond just knowing, okay, here's the trailhead and go and just do whatever you want. So, um, yeah, I think Gerry has this great middle ground in there. Yeah, basically for each peak, he'll basically introduce it with whatever introduction he wants to give. And I'll give a silly example here.
Yeah, no, some of these are fantastic.
So I love how he gets into Mount Cameron. He says,
Okay.
people have poo-pooed Cameron for years. It is the official, unofficial peak. If Cameron were just 50 feet higher, it would reign supreme. Nevertheless, it sits there named and waiting. The views from Cameron are better than the views of Cameron. And anyone that's hiked Cameron knows that. And anyone that's, maybe driven a white GMC SUV up Cameron knows that that's probably true. I love how Gerry kind of introduces somewhat poetically each peak, and then he'll launch into all of the different approaches and all the different possible trailheads, like you mentioned before, Zach. So he'll describe where that trailhead is. He'll describe how to get to the trailhead from wherever you're probably going to park your car. From there, he will add on every possible route description, like you mentioned, which will be headlined by the round trip, the gain, in my edition, the Roach points, and then he'll launch into his route description. Again, it won't necessarily be step by step, but it'll be a good description of the bulk of the route and it'll highlight here's what you don't want to do. Here are some of the mistakes you could make, but I don't want you to make. And so I'm going to highlight them here. And then eventually he'll get to, like you mentioned, Zach, he'll say, scamper up this chimney and you're at the top. And he'll give his summary of the summit from there. So, and he'll do that for every route. And he'll add in, this is one thing I love too. He'll add in extra credits in there
Yes.
which are going to be either unranked 14ers nearby that you could tack on or 13ers nearby. If you haven't gotten into 13ers, taking Gerry's extra credits is a great way to get into 13ers because you're already up there. There's a fair chance there's a 13er nearby you could just kind of tack on if you've got the time and the energy for it. Why not just go for it? And again, those sections are pretty much summaries. They're not going to be step by step, but they're great ways to, okay, here's 10 sentences on adding on Mount Sheridan to Mount Sherman. Okay, great. I can maybe do that. So he's got those scattered all throughout for each 14er. So to me, that's kind of the basic summary of how he describes each route for each mountain. And I think he does it wonderfully well.
Yeah, I'm looking here at one of the pages I've dog-eared, which is the description of Mount Sherman, which you just mentioned. He says Sherman is popular as an early season training climb, and sometimes people sleep on the summit before departing on high altitude adventures in Earth's elevated ranges. Thus does Sherman touch greatness. There's
Oh,
there's sometimes there's a bit of wit in there. There's this real kind of understanding though that there are for a lot of these, even for Sherman, there's multiple routes that he puts in there. There's
yeah.
multiple trailheads. There's extra credit. He will give you variations on these routes. The other thing that we should
Yeah.
mention too, this is the first guidebook that included copies of topo maps. So
Yes,
mine are in
yes.
black and white, but even in black and white, the contrast is really good. They're quite effective. You can at least see generally where he wants you to go. He's given routes with different kind of dotted lines or bubbles or whatever. All of that makes this feel much more comprehensive. And I just want to say, just as a kind of general feel, when he gives all these different ways of going up a mountain, there's this real appreciation for mountains themselves. Like, there's not just one way to do it. There's all these different ways to do it. There's all these different ways to see it and feel it. Gerry's really kind of in touch with the kind of the soul of mountains. Like, sometimes you just want to walk up. Sometimes you want a hard climb. And this book will give you the easiest route and the hardest route for each peak, and he'll name it. He'll grade it out for you. Also want to add, just in terms of like his descriptions, generally, even though they're not blow by blow, boy, they're accurate. like when he says drive 2.4 miles from this point,
Hmm.
I can almost guarantee it's somewhere between 2.3 and 2.5 miles.
Yep.
When he says hike another zero point 0.4 miles to this point before scampering up the chimney, generally it's about 0.4 like his either sense, or I'm sure maybe he had a pedometer with him or something. His general sense of those things is truly very trustworthy, as we've said
It's spot
before.
on.
It's
Yep.
almost always spot on.
Yep.
Is there anything more you want to say about the kind of the general route description-y part of this, Eric?
We've already kind of mentioned this a little bit, but he, in addition to caring about the mountain, like you mentioned, and the safety aspect, and he does add his wit and his humor in this. Like this
Yes.
is an entertaining read, and for anyone that has a passion for Fourteeners, you may live and die by Fourteeners.com, and that's fine. That's Middlebrook does a great job of with his route descriptions, with his summaries. Gerry, I think, adds a level of humor that makes it even more entertaining, just as much as it is informative. So, and it pervades everything. It pervades his, his appendices, but his route descriptions, there are just these little nuggets that you'll find in there that I got to point out his tour day whatever. Like he
Tour de
says
pyramid.
his the word tour probably comes up more than any other word in this book because
Uh,
he
a
says every
scenic.
mountain has a
Sometimes
tour.
there's a scenic tour.
It
Sometimes
is
there's
a scenic
a
tour
tour de
sometimes.
abyss. Sometimes
Right.
like there's all yeah. These little kind of we've called them roachisms where he just
Yeah.
coins a phrase, right? And like in these guidebooks, he's literally naming some features that we now commonly like the coulars on American Peak. That's in his 13ers book. I mean, Gerry named those. Captain Bivwacko Tower on the
Yeah,
Traverse
yes, that's right.
between Little Bear and Blanca. He named that. The
Hmm.
four classic traverses that comes out of
Yes.
Roach. That
Yep,
like
yep.
sometimes even with that camera description, he'll talk about the views. There's a when he talks about handies, like you'll be surrounded by this sea of peaks, and
Yeah.
he's really trying to give a sense of the allure of these. And if I can, I want to do a couple of these because some of these
Yeah, I do too.
are great and hilarious. Like so,
They are.
this is in the variation of Mount Princeton that he talks about.
Oh, I'm sure this will be good.
And
I'm sure
so
this is why you like it.
it's not the typical route, of course, but he says, leave the trail on the small ridge at 12,000 feet, traverse northwest to the snow finger, and ascend directly to the summit. After all, hotshots climb the face. And he has face in italics there. And
That's
I'm just
great.
like, yeah, like call him out, Gerry. We've made jokes about people wearing shorts on Bierstadt
Oh
on
yeah, oh yeah.
uh this is the description for Blanca Peak. He says Blanca is now there's more description before this, but he says Blanca is the highest peak in Colorado with a technical route on it. Its northeast face is one of Colorado's finest walls. Soaring 7,000 feet above its valleys, Blanca carries its honors well. Climate.
Yes, yeah, climate. That happens a couple times in this book.
Yeah, he uses him
I love it.
like that really punctive imperative voice. Like,
Yep,
sorry to be a professor for a minute, but
yep,
like
yep.
Wyndham Peak. He says he's talking about Wyndham. He says this is the easiest route on Wyndham. So this is the West Ridge from
Mm,
Chicago Basin.
the 2+. Yep.
Yep, you can see the upper part of the West Ridge from Treeline in Chicago Basin. This is a surrealistic tour in the heart of Colorado's wilderness. I have done this route many times, and it always reminds me of why I started climbing.
That's cool.
Like, there's moments like that where I'm like, there's a deep appreciation for mountains in these,
Yeah.
a real celebration of the fun of climbing them, of the primal urge of doing it, but also just of the beauty of doing it. I don't know,
Yep.
do you have other roach isms that you want to toss out there?
I have a couple that just very specific ones, very succinct. So one is from Mount Elbert. In his initial description of it, this is actually the first sentence of his Mount Elbert route description. He says, "All rise. This mighty lump has received many accolades."
What a word. Lump.
So good. Oh, I love it. He's like kind of it's like a backhanded compliment there. So, and the other one that I think is actually really funny has to do. He calls out the Lincoln Group and particularly Mount Brost. So we're crapping on Cameron. We're gonna crap on Bross a little bit too.
No, no, Jerry's going to Eric.
Well, I'm fully in agreement with this. What he says though, he says Mount Bross challenges photographers to make it look dramatic. Oh my gosh,
Now,
that's
okay,
so
now contrast that. This is my last one. Now contrast that
yeah,
somewhat mundane
snarky.
description of snarky description of Bross with his description of Handy's. I mean, it's almost literary. This winsome peak stands by itself 5 miles west of Red Cloud and Sunshine. The upper end of the lake fork of the Gunnison River embraces
Oh,
Handy's in a wide horseshoe, and the peak lies deep in the heart of the eastern San Juans. The view from Handy's summit is famous and spectacular. On the summit, you are surrounded by mountains as far as the eye can see in all directions. If civilization is pressing in on you, climb Handy's and spend a long hour or two on the summit.
that's
Like,
pretty cool.
I feel like this is someone who has moods for these mountains, and I just really love reading it, and part of the joy of reading a guidebook is reading it and fantasizing about hiking it, and it makes the reading it and fantasizing part fun.
Yeah.
Unless it's Bross apparently, and then you're like, ah, crap, why do I
Poor
have to do
Cameron.
this? Maybe I'll go hike something unranked instead. Jerry seems to like
Right.
those.
Oh boy.
So in terms of route descriptions too, you mentioned to me before we started recording here that there's a revision that was made to the Mount of the Holy Cross route description that I think bears some kind of mention.
Yeah, and this one is not as silly or snarky. This is actually a very serious one, unfortunately. So, to bring a little chronological context, 1996, the second edition comes out, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's the version you've got. In, I believe it was 2005, and a lot of Colorado 14-year enthusiasts are going to be familiar with this. There was a story of a lady named Michelle Vanek. She and her hiking partner, Eric Sawyer, were attempting Mount of the Holy Cross. I won't get into all the details. You can find lots of resources online to kind of describe what happened, but basically, they, I guess, mistakenly went up the Halo Ridge route, which is not what they wanted to do. They wanted to go the North Ridge route, which is a little less intensive, but Michelle Vanek just she tapped out. It didn't have the energy, was dehydrated, could not go any further. Her hiking partner, Eric Sawyer, says, I'm just going to scamper up to the summit of Holy Cross real quick, kind of pointed, I guess, in some general direction, try and meet me over here. And he never saw her again. And this massive search and rescue over several days happens around Mount of the Holy Cross. She's not found. And so, partially as a result of that, Gerry, in his third edition, which comes out in 2011, so several years after that, he revises his introduction to Mount of the Holy Cross by saying that Eagle County, where Mount of the Holy Cross sits, Eagle County Sheriff and SAR have approached him and asked him to specifically highlight certain hazards on Holy Cross because they've gotten so many calls. And he says, I'm happy to oblige that. And he does. He highlights three unique hazards. And in one of them, the one that he takes half a page to describe, he discusses Halo Ridge and just how laborious it can be. And that can actually be a hazard on
Yeah.
this route because it's so long and it's so committing. And he does not mention Michelle Vanek by name, but he tells the story of a tragic situation where a lady lost her life on that route. And again, anyone that knows the Michelle Vanek story knows that he's talking about her. And so he wants people to be safe and he wants to warn people when there's going to be a route that is going to be particularly taxing or otherwise unsafe. And he highlights, or I should say, lowlights really, the
Mm-hmm.
Michelle Vanek story without using her name. So he prints this in 2011 in the third edition, and then many, many years later, her remains are found.
Not until
And
2024 or
2020,
2025.
it was September 2024 that her
Yeah.
remains were found 20 years after it happened and 15 years after his third edition comes out. So it's an unfortunate and tragic situation, one that I think he, again, not by name, but he mentions specifically because he wants his readers to be safer after reading his book than before. So he does a great service to us, the reader, in including that tragic story in his Holy Cross summary.
Yeah, I think Roach is really trying to toe this fine line throughout this whole book of expecting a certain level of competence
Yeah.
as a hiker, but also reckoning with the fact that a lot of people hike these peaks. And I think he feels a duty to make sure that those that aren't as competent are going to be safe. But he doesn't want to overprescribe it such that anyone can do it either. Like, I think he still wants that spirit of adventure. Like, I don't need a picture telling me to turn right at this cairn. He certainly wants to leave some of it up to the individual hiker to kind of determine for themselves. So
Absolutely.
in that case, though, yeah, it was Vanek and her partner Sawyer. Anyone that's been to Holy Cross knows that within the first 10 feet of the trail, it splits. And
Yep.
going one way or the other is the difference between a 12-mile day and a 17-mile day. So there is considerable variation there, and I'm glad he included that stuff.
Yep.
Is there anything else you want to say about Gerry's kind of route descriptions, prose? We could just do a whole reading of Jerryisms one day just for funsies.
Would be fun. We were talking about doing maybe a random trivia episode. I think throwing some of his random silliness could be a fun way to do that. The only other thing I have is I want to dig just a teeny bit into the Roach point system. He
Yeah.
doesn't he doesn't get into how he calculates these, but basically he takes great pain to note that these Roach points are simply based on what he calls effortculty. So effort and difficulty of a route. They do not factor in weather, they don't factor in someone's conditioning or their preparedness. It's simply the route itself. And however he does to calculate it, I'd love to find out. I'm sure he's got a complicated spreadsheet with all sorts of different factors in there. I would love to see that, but I'm also a dork. So, but his Roach points, I've been following those ever since my first 14er ever, which was Long's Peak via the Keyhole route. And
Yeah.
it's 348 Roach points. And ever since I've done that, I've looked at the Roach points for every route and said, I'm going to focus on any route that's fewer than 348 points because I don't want to push myself that hard. So I love that he does that. It seems like it's rather objective, not subjective. And I think it's a very succinct way of saying this is how difficult a route's going to be or how much work it's going to take to get to the summit via this route. So I love the Roach point system. I think it's great.
I do too. Even though I said it's not in my book, I have other books of his where it does appear.
Yeah.
And I'm with you. I don't know what the math is behind it, and maybe we'll have to ask Gerry this. I don't know if there is math behind it, but maybe it's just voodoo. But if he doesn't nail it in terms of my own subjective perception of the difficulty of a trail, when we did Half Peak last year, I think that's like 250 Roach points.
Yeah.
And then I did a hike earlier this year, California Peak, and it said it was like 180. And I'm like, yeah, that's actually a lot easier than Half Peak was, and actually probably by about, I don't know, 30%. And then of course, Gerry's represented that
Yes.
numerically. So
Yeah.
I think those are great. I think his classifications, class 1, 2, 2 plus, 3, 4, 5 are good. I leave it to the climbers among us to tell us whether or not he's accurate with anything 5.0 and up. I
Yeah.
haven't done those. So yeah, I like that. I have one last, I think this may be a philosophical discussion, but I have one big question that we should talk about that's maybe relevant here. This is a great guidebook. I love reading it. But you and I are old and we have Android phones and so on, Eric. But is there still a place for guidebooks in our world where we've mentioned, Fourteerners.com for a lot of these peaks can give you the blow by blow, or the aforementioned Laura Clark. If you go to Wild Wanderer's website, boy, she gives at least 40, 50 pictures per mountain, and she's got arrows and stuff,
Videos.
videos. The Coonies, climb13ers.com has pretty extensive route descriptions as well, although not nearly as extensive as some others. Is there a place still in the world for a physical hard copy book like this?
I think so, because just from my perspective, I like to be as prepared as I possibly can be. I mean, within reason. I think that if you have the resources from Fourteeners.com, the route description from Roach, and maybe even a printout of the topo map that he's got included in here too, like you mentioned before, you're going to be as prepared as you can be for a 14er, in my opinion. We talk about his desire to keep us safe. He does that remarkably well. And in addition to the Coonies and Laura Clark, like you mentioned, and the virtual Sherpa has great videos, and Summit Post has descriptions. There are a lot of different resources we can use, and I think Gerry's is one of the best ways to be ready for a mountain and still have that spirit of adventure. I think Gerry's descriptions of how to get to the tops of these mountains is a perfect balance between having nothing and having everything. And I don't know, what do you think, Z?
Oh, I completely agree. Unsurprisingly, I want to just highlight what you said, that kind of balance between overprescription, which some can do, and on some of these things where there's like a set of moves you need to make, like on Mount Wilson, like you need to know what it looks like when you turn left instead of go right. Sometimes that's nice, but there is something lost there, and we should keep in mind what's lost there is that sense of primal urge, of adventure, of mystery that I think Roach is really well attuned to. I think you're right. I think he's trying to strike that balance between, well, here's a trailhead, go forth and climb, and here's a step-by-step instruction manual. Sometimes Fourteeners.com, if you download the app, can give you that blow by blow. And to me, that breeds a kind of I don't know, lack of mystery, but also an over reliance on that technology, so that when you are faced with a mountain that doesn't have that anymore, you may be bereft. You may not have the kind of gift for finding your way that a kind of leaner guide like this might give you, where it's just like, I've got a map and I've got the route description from Roach, and that's all I need. And I feel like this prepared me well for hiking 13ers,
Oh, yeah.
because when I started doing 13ers, I'm like, well, I know how to get to a trailhead, and I know how to start up a mountain, and I'll figure it out from there. And often that's what you do on a 13er. So
Yep.
I feel like this prepared me well for that ethos. I hike without technology, and my only technology is a map generally, and sometimes I just kind of remember these. I do want to say one more thing too, which is all those other guides are great, and you and I use them frequently,
Do.
but
Yep.
none of them are literature. And I think the part of the advantage of a book like this is that it's written by, even though Gerry's a computer scientist, it's written by a real author.
Yeah.
And this book inspires me. It makes me want to go hike mountain. It makes me want to climb it. That's all the more reason that you own a physical object that has a soul in it, because it moves you in a certain way that simply route description will not do. So my defense of it would be a defense of the humanity that's kind of built into the whole process of reading it and then going and hiking from it.
That's perfect.
Anything else, Eric, about Mr. Roach?
I think we could do 5 episodes like this and have a lot of fun and go through just all sorts of different aspects of this book. There's probably a lot that we didn't even touch, but
Totally.
we got to start somewhere. And I think this is a great way to start with this classic book. So
Go buy this book. We're going to
he
shill
said,
for Gerry. Gerry does not need it in his retirement fund, I'm sure, but some of these have actually fallen out of print, but you can buy them on Amazon and eBay and so forth. But no, my only thing I would wish is that people would read and appreciate these. I know there's other guides, and we'll probably do some other guides in the future too. There's the Dawson guide, and there's some other fun stuff, and there are people that still write guidebooks. There's a great guidebook about the Sangres that I've just gotten off of Amazon, and I want to maybe chat with the author at some point. But
cool.
yeah. So if people want to talk about their experience with guidebooks or with deer that refuse to move, Eric, how should they get a hold of
We
us?
we do want to hear all this, especially the deer one.
Yeah,
That's an interesting one.
we need to crowdsource that.
Well, we'd love to hear from our listeners about those topics or darn near any topic at our email address, which is greensandbluespodcast@gmail.com, or you can visit our website, greensandbluespodcast.podbean.com, where you can find all sorts of other ways to connect with us and get a hold of us.
We love hearing from you guys. Please also, if you have questions, send them to us via voicemail. As before, send them to us via chat or Gmail. I hope everybody is having a great summer of hiking out there, enjoying the conditions in Colorado, enjoying the beautiful mountains. As Gerry would say, climate.